Further ado, welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, chapter 41, titled A Crash Course in Reverence and Love. And this is the first of our new 10-week series on Tanya, season 9. We're almost done. Last one is season 10. And we are going to break over this course for 2 weeks. 3 weeks. One for Purim and then 2 for Pesach. And let's dive right into it. In the Practical Tanya by Rabbi Chaim Miller, we are on page 492, and you should have the handout in front of you for chapter 41, A Crash Course in Reverence and Love. And so to review, at the end of the last course, we discussed, where we were discussing, of course, the power of Kavanah. The Alter Rebbe left us off on a note that every mitzvah is way more powerful. It gets its wings, it flies up to God, it connects us to God on a much deeper level when it is driven by kavanah, when it is driven by emotion. And in general, the Alter Rebbe reminds us at the beginning of this chapter that these two primary emotions are love and fear, love and reverence, two emotions that we can have for God. How we can have them, how deep they can be, what tips we can do to have them, the practical route to developing them is the topic of our new 10-week series. And just as one more small introduction to chapter 41, I know we've done more than one. I wanted to call your attention, if we can read together, we're skipping ahead a little bit and we're going to start chapter 41 in a moment, but on page 494, he brings down an interesting letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, right? So our Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, not Rabbi Shneer Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe. And he brings down this letter. It's in the third paragraph on the page. And this is one of many such letters that the Rebbe wrote. The Rebbe writes, "The Yetzer Hara, meaning the evil inclination, is never lazy and is very busy and industrious in his efforts to distract a Jew from his service to God. Therefore, you must have a ready weapon with which to combat him, with which to do battle with him. For this reason, I suggest that you should study well and learn by heart the beginning of chapter 41 of Tanya, until those sacred words are engraved upon your mind and memory, so that you will always be able to recall them and think upon them whenever the need arises to overcome a temptation, etc." The Rebbe is referring to the first, basically, page, not in this version, but in the original text of the Tanya, where it's the same imagery as it was in the original print, about the first page plus one line until the word Hamelech. It's the first about 30 lines of the chapter. And I would say, if anybody wants to do this, I would love to hear results. That if you stopped your average Chabadnik on the street and asked him, can you recite chapter 41 of Tanya from memory to me? If anyone's going to New York for Shabbat in the Heights in June with us, or in May, try that on the streets of Crown Heights. I would be curious to know. You would definitely have a high percentage that would be able to. I certainly can say the first 30, 40 lines of chapter 41 by heart. And that is, what?
If I could shake your hand, I would. Seriously?
Why, just for learning a couple words by heart?
A couple words?
I didn't say that I implement them into my service and that I know how to have a proper love and reverence for God. I don't. Let me knock that one out of the park.
No, but that's still good.
And why these particular. By the way, having words of Tanya in your mind, having certain words of Tanya that you know by heart, is very common in Hasidic circles. The first couple chapters, the first 12 chapters, the first chapter, the first couple lines, chapter 32, very basic sections. But the Rebbe encouraged many people that this particular chapter they should try to have as much as possible in mind. Isn't that interesting? And the reason for that is because this chapter has some very fundamental points, particularly at the beginning.
So let's hear it.
And so let's hear it. The Alter Rebbe begins by blowing our minds a little bit, because until today we've heard that positive mitzvot, right? Mitzvot aseh, doing something for God, is driven by love. I love God, therefore I do something. A negative mitzvah, not doing something for God, a don't, is driven by fear, by reverence, right? I revere God, I fear God, I believe He's the greatest one, therefore I wouldn't dare do something that He doesn't want me to do. Says the Alter Rebbe, however, let's break the notion right now. In order to do a mitzvah properly, even a positive commandment, there needs to be at the very least, in addition to your love, a basic reverence, a basic fear of the Almighty, a basic awe of the Almighty.
That should be the starting point.
Okay. Normally we say that in order to do a positive commandment, in order to do something for Hashem, not refrain from not doing something. But in order to do something for Hashem, there should be a love. That's usually why human beings do something. I love someone else, therefore I do them that favor. Of course, Jeff, I would be glad to get you a cup of water because I love you so much, right? The opposite, not doing something, right? If Jeff doesn't want me to have a drink of water, chances are I'm still going to do it even though I love him. However, if I was afraid of Jeff, if I had like this awe and reverence and like respect for him, and he said, don't drink a cup of water, I'd be like, okay, I respect him so much. So therefore, if he says not to do it, I'm not going to do it. So normally that's the basic way we say that they're translated. However, here the Alter Rebbe reminds us that even to do a positive mitzvah, even to do something which is a mitzvah taseh, there has to be a basic element of reverence. And why is that?
I think it's the same thing.
Okay, fair enough. And the reason for that, says the Alter Rebbe, is because you have to at least be able to reach a stage where it's not dependent on that emotion. In other words, normally when we do something because we love someone else, so if that love is more intense, right? So right now I'm thinking about how all Jews are connected, etc., whatever, and then Marguerite asks me to do something. Of course I'm going to do it for her. Are you kidding me? I would bend over backwards to do anything for you. All Jews are interconnected and we're all connected. But if I'm thinking about it less, if that emotion is there less, right now I'm not feeling so connected, I wouldn't do it as much, right? So while that emotion drives it, it would depend on how much of that emotion is there. And sometimes I'm in the mood and sometimes I'm not in the mood, right? Let's take a more simple example. I love God, therefore I pray to Him. Oh my goodness, I want to sit here and praise Him the whole day, right? I'm not so in the mood. I don't have this intense feeling of love for God, therefore I don't pray to Him as much. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. But if you have a very basic level of reverence, at least a level of, I respect God so much that even if I'm not right now that in the mood of loving Him, I'm still going to do it. So at least that basic level of reverence there has to be.
It's like between spouses.
100%. Yes, exactly. Where the love, if I may, where you're saying, where the love waxes and wanes. And if you have a basic level of respect for the other person as well, in addition to the love, so then you also do it when you're not in the mood of it. Okay. We're going to talk more about this later. And just as a teaser, I'll tell you that these are going to come to be known the way of serving God as a son and the way of serving God as a servant. And by son here, we don't mean specifically son, it's daughter, it's the same thing, right? The child-parent relationship. But before we get to that, the Alter Rebbe wants to take a moment to talk a little bit more about reverence. Most importantly, the Alter Rebbe wants to talk about the fact that if the Torah commands us to have an emotion for God, and we touched on this earlier in Tanya, and our immediate reaction is, how can I have an emotion for God? How can I ever love or fear something or someone that I've never had any, that I can't, that's abstract for me. So the Alter Rebbe has always told us that the basic remedy to that is meditation. We are not commanded to love God. That's impossible. We can't be commanded to have an emotion. We are commanded to do the best in our ability to arouse that emotion. In other words, we are commanded, right, this is an extrapolation, to learn Chassidus. To learn as much as we can about God, to learn about how much we should love God, to learn about how much we are rooted in God, and how much God created the world, and how much God is really in existence all around us, etc., which will eventually lead to an emotional connection with God. Same thing with fear, same thing with reverence. So what is a meditation that can help us with reverence? So the first thing that the Alter Rebbe does is lay down the ground rules. There are two levels of reverence for God. A simple level of reverence for God, which we're going to call Kabbalat Ol, accepting the yoke. In the words of the Zohar, I think I quoted this on the handout later. Yeah, the Zohar says, just as an ox must first have a yoke placed upon it before it is useful, so too a person must first accept the yoke of heaven before serving God. At the very basic level, so the first level of meditation that we're going to talk about, which is going to bring about the first level of fear of God, Yira Tata, lower fear of God, is going to be a fear which is going to develop into an acceptance of the yoke. An acceptance of the obedience, an acceptance of a submission, of the sovereignty of God. Right? Which also takes meditation. Let's not kid ourselves. That's not an easy thing to do, right? It's not easy to say to yourself, I accept everything, the sovereignty of Hashem, and I do everything that Hashem says just because Hashem said to do it. But if we think about it enough, we can get there. Before we get into the details of that, The second level would be internalizing that obedience. So it's that it's not necessarily obedience anymore, but that I've managed to completely submit my own desire, and now my desires are God's desires. Coming from a place of reverence. Coming from a place of, I respect God so much that I submit myself completely to Him, a level we're not going to touch on for right now. So first to the basic level. Says the Alter Rebbe, this particular meditation that the Alter Rebbe says, tried and proven, seen it, done it, worked, it goes in 4 steps. Number 1, the awesomeness of the King of Kings. You're never going to develop a proper reverence for anything if you don't actually know enough about it and know enough to respect it, right? So the first step is the awesomeness of God. The awesomeness of God as it is removed from this world, right? Just God is so awesome, and that can come from many different details, right? How great and how removed and how infinite compared to our finite selves God is. Okay? Step 2. That doesn't remain in the abstract. Mimale kalamin. God chooses to, sorry, not God chooses, before we get to that. The second step is mimale kalamin, that it's not abstract. God's existence actually is one with the world. It fills the world. Mimale kalamin, it fills all space. There is no space where we can, quote, get away from the awesomeness of God. So it went from being removed but being very awesome to all of a sudden not so removed, still pretty awesome, still pretty, I'm having a hard time removing the word awesome from the millennial definition. Still fills me with awe, but now a little bit more relatable because it's here in this world. Step 3, God chooses to focus His kingship over Israel. There are many verses that back this up, where God says, I have chosen with all this awesomeness, to focus my sovereignty over the people of Israel. In other words, I've given you the mitzvah. I've told you this is what I want you to do. And I've chosen to focus that kingship, which I may have over the entire world, and I may even have it in abstract if the world didn't exist, but I choose to focus it on the Jewish people. And then, the Alter Rebbe ends off with some very powerful words. V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, u'melo chol ha'aretz kvodo, u'mabit alav v'ochin klayot v'alev im ovdo karoi. And God is always standing right next to us. And He is gazing at us. And he cares about every action that we do. And He's watching, are we going to serve Him properly or not? I know this is very easily interchangeable with dictatorship, or you should be afraid of me because I'm going to do something bad to you, but that's not the idea. I've given you this opportunity, right? God says it to us over and over in the Torah. See, I have put here before you today good and bad, right? Life and death. Blessings and curse. Good and bad. Holiness and evil. Life and death. And what are you going to choose? And God is hanging on to our every action. And these are important. These are things that do not come naturally to us. None of these things will just be like, you're walking down the street and you're like, yeah, of course God is watching everything I do. They're never going to come naturally. The more we think about them, is there a natural fear within us? Is there a natural reverence for God? Yes. I think you mentioned that earlier. But our job is to take that through this 4-step meditational process until we realize how great God is and how relatable and how personal that greatness is to us.
I want to say something.
Before we do that, I just want to point out just a little fun, Chabad trivia kind of thing. The Rebbe, at one point, wrote a very, very interesting letter, and a couple to a professor, and a couple months later founded an organization based on the theory that was expressed in that letter, which was, the Rebbe says, I've thought long and hard about the situation of youth in America, about the problem that youth do not feel any authority to anything, never mind to God. The Rebbe says they feel like they're the smart aleck, I'm a smart boy, I can figure it out. As long as the cop on the street, the only thing they fear is the cop on the street. If the cop on the street is not there, then I could do, right? And they even feel like they could outsmart the cops. They can do whatever they want. There's no sense of inner authority, of inner obedience to anything that is imbued within a child at that point it was the 19th century, the 20th century. of anything. So the Rebbe established a program for children, which till today in Chabad they follow, where children are made soldiers. And all military terminology is used, even though this is essentially just a program encouraging them to be good and moral human beings. It's called the Army of Hashem. Until today, there's an organization in New York, and they have tens of thousands of children signed, more, hundreds of thousands of children signed up. And every child in that army knows that they're either a sergeant, a general, a major, or something, a 5-star general, wherever they are along the lines. And how do they upgrade? By accomplishing missions. And those missions are their responsibility to do. And nobody else keeps track of them but them. And they go into their system, today's day and age it's an app, and they log on, and they have to log their missions. And in this way, you imbue within a child a sense of authority to something, in this case to God. A sense of obedience.
Responsibility.
And responsibility, that's a good line.
Sounds cultish.
It does sound cultish, except that, number one, nobody's asking you for your money. No, but more importantly, there's no obedience to any human beings here, at all. There's but there's a strong sense that the only person you're responsible to is not just yourself. Because that's one of the major problems that I've felt with American youth, that they felt I am and all. We need to imbue within them, which, if you look at any of the systems for anybody who's had issues in life, whether it's alcoholism, drugs, narcotics, the works, right? It's always one of the most important things is to recognize that you are not end all, right? In AA, I know, for instance, they call it the higher power, right? God, whatever you want to call it, but there has to be a sense of obedience to something that's higher than you. Anybody ever heard of this? The yarmulke? Right? That's the idea. Where was I getting to? Over the years, from 1981 when the Rebbe established this until the Rebbe's passing in 1994, more and more details were added to this idea. One of them came over the next few years, where the Rebbe introduced 12 Torah passages. The Rebbe says this is the mission statement of this army, right? And they come in equal parts from the written Torah, the oral Torah, and Chassidus. So 3, 3, 3, and 3. 12. One of the ones from Chassidus is in this week's Torah portion, is in this week's chapter. These words that I just quoted by heart, I remember by heart because when I was a child, giving away my age here, but I was born after the 80s, and I was immediately, as a Chabad boy, given this system of education. And we used to say these psukim, like to remember that this is our motto, and this is our goal. So in addition to obviously things like Torah belongs to every Jew, and themes like, God created the world, and these are all central themes to Judaism. One of them was that we have to recognize that V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, that Hashem cares about every action that you do. And it gives a person an incredible sense of purpose. Think about it. Yeah, there's this awesome world, this awesome God who created the whole thing, and how often do they creep through the Facebook and the Twitter feeds of all these people that are right that how on the news they like to dissect every whether it's mentally unstable or do a terrorist minded or whatever it was individual who goes and does a mass shooting or mass attack of some sort. Afterwards, one of the favorite things of the news is to go through his social media. How often is one of the lines there that they notice, which they say shows the instability of the mental instability of the person, is the fact that he starts saying, "Oh, I don't matter in this world," right? Oh, this is such a big world. Nobody even knows who I am. So very often they say that the whole inspiration behind these terrible acts that they do is why? Because they think that if I do that, I can get myself on the news. Then everybody will know I matter, right? Everybody's going to know that. What a powerful lesson is that to send that to a child, that not only do you have a personal sense of responsibility, you matter, and Hashem cares about every action that you do, and when you succeed, He is like, through the roof, this is the purpose why I created the world. And when you don't, He's like, I'm sure He doesn't use any foul language, but He says,
He says, I'll give you
oh
another
gosh,
chance.
Right? And He says, I'll give you another chance. My point is that there's this sense of like every moment is ours for the grabbing. Anyways, but that being the culmination of this meditation that we just introduced definitely brings about it. It brings about a sense of intense, not just purpose, but a sense of intense trepidation. Instead of it being, oh, I'm just about to drink a tea. Who cares if I make a bracha or not? If you actually take a moment to think and meditate that whole thing, which ideally you do before every mitzvah, so you're like, whoa. It's not about just me drinking the tea. This is like a global cosmic moment right here. Right? as the Alter Rebbe ends off, it eventually should bring a feeling similar, akin to the one when a subject stands before his king. Right?
So this is about nullification.
This is not a nullification yet. That would be the ultimate level. This is just about acceptance of a sovereignty, acceptance of an obedience, not a relationship. No. Not just a relationship, because that could be love. Acceptance of a higher power, let's call it, of a submission to something higher than you, of an obedience to something higher than you, right? Acceptance of a yoke. That's literally the words, Kabbalat Ol.
Recognizing that there's something more than you.
Right. Now, it's a lot more than recognizing something that's more than you, but I think you guys get the idea. Now, I want to stress, because whenever we're going to talk about meditation is a personal experience. So, first question, how often does one need to meditate? As often as you feel that emotion is lacking. If you feel like that emotion...
Why aren't we meditating?
Right now?
No, like Chabad.
We do.
We have, like,
As I'm a Chabadnik, I meditate.
That we sit and we meditate.
We could do a little confession here if you want. Hi, my name is Zushi, I meditate.
Okay.
No, you don't meditate?
I do.
Okay, so you could say, hi, my name is Irit, I meditate.
It's a very big part of it.
So yes, meditation is a very, very big part of it. I think when you say meditation, you're referring specifically to secular meditation. Secular meditation usually involves a mantra of some sort, a whatever. It has lots of things that come from other religions, etc.
Not necessarily.
Let's take, but 1 second. Let me explain to you that Chabad is full of meditation. Judaism is full of meditation, and it doesn't have to look like what it looks like in the picture in your mind or in anybody's mind. What is meditation? Meditation is taking a moment to think about one thing very intensely and very deeply in order to get us to a place where it does something to us. That meditation does something to us. This is exactly what the Alter Rebbe is advising us right here. Think about Hashem for long enough before davening, like that you can reach a space where that develops into an emotion, and that emotion drives whatever mitzvah it is that you're doing. That's it. You don't have to have your fingers out. You don't have to hum. You don't have to have any mantra. If that works for you, gesundheit. Judaism is not going to tell you need to do those things. You want to sing a niggin in yeshiva.
You can say God is great.
I understand. Yeah. If that works for you, you are more than welcome to do that. But Judaism is not going to tell you need to do that.
Yeah.
Judaism does tell you that meditation is very, very important, because without meditation, you're not emotions don't just pop into your heart. I will tell you that in yeshiva, it was very, very common, very, very common to see, and I will say, but in general, service of Hashem is done much more intensely in yeshiva, because it's single boys, single girls, and they have much more time in their lives, and they're focused on that. I hate to say it, but I gotta put food on the table, and somebody's gotta change Menachem's diapers and all sorts of things. Is that an excuse? No. There should definitely be meditation involved in the service of a Jew, ideally every time before a mitzvah. And this actually ties directly into the point that I'm saying right now, which is meditation is a personal experience. Do it as often as possible, as thoroughly as possible, particularly preceding mitzvot, as much as you feel is necessary in your life. But back to the point I was going to say, is that in yeshiva it was very, very common that you would walk through the halls of yeshiva, like the study hall of yeshiva, as they were getting ready for davening, and everybody was starting davening at a different time. You would catch a guy snapping his fingers. You would catch a guy humming a tune, like a niggin under his breath. One of my Rabbi Yitzchak Nemenov, who was the dean of the yeshiva that I went to in France, would stand. I remember, I'll never forget. He would stand against the wall like this, and he would go back and forth for hours. For hours, you would see him like that, standing. And this was just his pose where he felt comfortable. Whatever, everybody does it however they feel, and yeah, meditation is a very, very central part of the Jewish experience.
Parlez-vous français?
Oui, bien sûr. Okay, and now on to section 3. So what's phase 2, right? Internalizing that obedience, right? So that, obviously, is internalizing in a way that we realize every time we do a mitzvah, every time we study Torah, everything is God. I don't need this whole business of accepting a yoke upon myself. I am doing something right now where I'm connecting to the all-knowing and all-powerful God. It's not an easy thing to do, because our egos, whether we allow them to be a central focus in our lives, or even if they're just a partial focus in our lives, right? They're there, right? So in order to reach an ultimate stage like that, actually internalize that obedience, that it becomes second nature, that it's actually part of you, I think your ego ceases to almost exist. Does that make sense? In other words, it becomes, that whole illusion gets pumped.
And then you get a humility for God.
Oh yeah, not just humility, but hopefully, there's nothing else besides for God. But that is a very intense level, not the topic of our conversation today. But the Alter Rebbe just mentions it. Okay? I'm saying too much with it. Number 4. So the Alter Rebbe now proceeds, and this is a lot of fun. Maybe you're going to like this because this is going to sound much more like secular meditation than you're used to give us meditations for very specific mitzvot. You see, it's going to be up to us, ultimately, when we do a mitzvah, how we can meditate it. But the Alter Rebbe is just giving us examples here of the more you think about a mitzvah, and the more you think about your connection to Hashem through that mitzvah, the more you'll realize that there's so much material. Tefillin, for example. For those of you that are familiar, the tefillin have 4 parshiot, or 4 sections of the Torah in them. In the head tefillin, it's all on one scroll. In the hand tefillin, it's split into 4. I apologize, I mixed them up. In the hand tefillin, they're all on one scroll and they're in there. And in the head tefillin, it's split into 4. If you've ever seen a pair of tefillin before, they've been formed into a box. It's 4 separate compartments. And in each of those compartments goes one of these parshot, one of these sections of the Torah. Now, does anybody know the purpose of why we put on tefillin?
Because it is written.
That's true. And that's a very basic level of observance. Right, exactly. It says in the Torah, you should tie it for a sign upon your hands, or as a frontlet between your eyes. But the halacha, Shulchan Aruch, in the Jewish code of law, it gives us a little bit of a deeper understanding. We put it on our head, directly across from our mind, and on our hand, directly across from our heart, because we're giving our intellect and our emotions, even though throughout our day we're going to go about and do lots of things as a body, we want to remind ourselves we have a soul as well, and that soul is devoting all of its intellect and all of its emotion throughout the day to Hashem. Right? And that's a very simple way of looking at it. The Alter Rebbe here takes it a step further. He says, if you look at the parashiyot that there are in tefillin, you'll notice that tefillin they embody the intellect and the emotion of Hashem. So when you connect it to your intellect and to your emotion, you're actually fusing those two together, which is a very awesome experience by any level of understanding. How does that work? So, first the emotions. The emotions, Shema, right? We already spoke about the paragraph of Shema Yisrael, Shema Kedosh, Shema Echad, and then following that, all of the right. You should love God with all your heart, and what you should do as a result of loving God with all your heart and all your might. That's love. The following paragraph, if anybody ever takes a moment to read it in English, I mean, if that's not severity, if that's not gevura, right? Chesed, love and kindness. If V'hayim Shemoah is not gevura, is not severity, I don't know what is. God starts to tell us, if you don't keep the Torah and mitzvot, I'm going to stop the rain, and you're not going to have any crops growing, and you're not going to have It's like there's double emotion that we have with God. And those are God's emotions in there. Right? God's emotional attributes. The first 2, or the other 2 parashiot, Torah portions which are in the head tefillin, right? So those are 2 of them, Shema and Vahaya. The other 2 are Kadesh Li is the beginning of it, and Vahaya Ki Yaviyacha. And each of these shows an intellect. One of them has the number 50 embedded in it over and over and over and over again, referring to the 50 levels of Bina, which is the second level of intellect, right? Usually translated as understanding or cognition. And Chachma is found in, I forget exactly how, 1 second. Forget exactly how, but those 2 are connected to the earth. So in other words, when we put on the tefillin, we are essentially putting on an embodiment of God's intellect and an embodiment of God's emotions, and we are connecting our emotions with God. And we are connecting our intellect with God. That should be a very powerful experience. The more you think about that, and the more you actually internalize that, the more that will bring a real feeling of like trepidation towards our service of Hashem. Talit.
Can I?
Sure. Sorry.
So you're telling me that God has emotions?
Not a conversation for today, but yes, God does have emotions. Are they like our emotions? No.
Okay.
I would actually usually, if we weren't talking about tefillin and trying to explain the mitzvah from the downward up, I would usually use the other perspective. We have emotions because God has emotions. The Torah tells us that God was created in man's image. That doesn't mean that God has a nose and ears and eyes.
Man was created in God's image.
Did I say the opposite?
Yeah.
Yes.
That man was created in God's image.
Yeah. You said God was
Okay.
created. Yeah.
That man was created in God's image. That doesn't mean that God has a nose and eyes and ears and
Yeah.
here. But it very much does mean that God has a nose and eyes and ears and here. What we have is the most physical embodiment of it. But on some level, that is, maybe on a very minute level, that's left over. But on the extremely spiritual and on the extreme, God has that. And God specifically created us with that same energy within us. But it's not a conversation right now. Can we leave it?
It must
Quick
have
question.
if we are an image.
Sure. What?
It must have. If
It must,
we are an
exactly.
image.
Emotions are brought about by events or feelings or things like that. God doesn't respond to events or feelings.
That is a great question. The Rambam Maimonides addresses it at length. The Alter Rebbe himself
I'll do that
addresses it at
after,
length.
yeah.
Now is not a good time to
Okay,
talk about it.
okay.
Because we would have basically spent the rest of our class on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Talit. The Alter Rebbe continues to talk about a meditation for Talit. When you wrap the Talit around yourself, first of all, in general, the Talit is considered God's hug. But here we're not talking about an emotion of love, but more of an emotion of reverence. A reverence meditation for Talit is that when you put on the Talit, you are, just as you wrap yourself on the Talit, you're wrapping yourself in God's kingship. And you're bringing that down. And now is not the time to dwell on that and to talk about all the details of that. But if you do unpack that statement, right? And that comes from verses in the Torah. If you recognize that when you put on the talit, when you put it on, when you wrap yourself in it, when you make a blessing on it, when you kiss it, you're actually drawing down God's kingship over you, that can elicit a tremendous reverence for Hashem.
And what's for us women?
With proper meditation. These are the examples that Alter Rebbe gives in Tanya. Why he doesn't give women examples, I don't know.
Because we are about.
Because you guys are more
You're
intuitive.
more holy. That's why.
No, because you're more intuitively in tune with it.
We're
You
already
know already
high
what the
level.
meditations are.
Yeah.
Irit tells me she meditates all the time already. She didn't even need it.
You have a closer connection.
I don't know.
with
The honest answer is I don't know. I don't know why the Alter Rebbe doesn't give examples from it. Okay. But back to the question we had all the way at the beginning. Why? Why is reverence really necessary to have a proper service of Hashem?
Makes it easy
Makes what easy?
to love him.
No. We're talking about when somebody only loves Hashem and doesn't revere Him, why can a positive mitzvah not be done? I have this great feeling of love for Hashem. Therefore, I want to do what Hashem says. Therefore, I put on tefillin. So we introduced the basic level of the fact that when, then if you're not in the mood, you're not going to do it. Right? But when I am in the mood, I'm doing it. Why is that not enough to make my mitzvah fly up above where it needs to go? The Alter Rebbe brings two quotes. One from the Torah, in Parashat Shemot. Both, not in Parashat Shemot, in the book of Shemot. Two of them actually, both from the book of Shemot. And then he brings in the Zohar as well. Where always the word used for serving God is serving. Anybody want to guess what's the word serving similar to? Servant. And who serves? Real servants. Does that ever occur to anybody? That when we say we're doing something for Hashem, we always call it a service? The Havdalah service and the Kiddush service and the Shachrit service, the Mincha service. Why service? What's this word service? Service usually means to serve someone else, like a servant or like your server in a restaurant, which is, by the way, the closest thing to a servant in that moment and in that job that he's doing. You don't own him, right? But he's completely devoted to your every will. I need more water is here. I need more, not that I advise snapping at waiters, not a good idea, not very polite. You see, because the Torah does want us to have a level of a servant. Because at all times, whenever we serve Hashem, we are simultaneously serving Him as a servant serves his master and as a son serves his father. Or as a son, see, serves already becomes a weird word to use. Or as a son does something for his father. And if you do that mitzvah, even if you do it perfectly, and even if you do it out of the most intense love for Hashem, but there isn't at least the very basic level of I do this because I'm obedient to Hashem, then you drop the ball because you've lost the whole level of servant. When I stood for 2 years on Park Avenue, 53rd Street, outside a mitzvah tank, right? I used to go every Friday with a mitzvah tank, sirens, not the sirens, the speakers blasting all the Hasidic music. We'd go outside, we'd dance, put on tefillin with people, etc. So that's like the epitome of you got to get your pitch. The elevator pitch, got nothing on this. This is like street pitch. You know what I mean? Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish? Yes. Why? He's already halfway down the block. You know what I mean? But even more important, let's say you get him to actually come and put on tefillin. That tefillin better be quick. It's better have everything that tefillin needs to have in that moment, because otherwise you had it for 2 minutes, you put it on, but if you didn't get it in. So I would explain to him this concept of connecting our intellect and our emotions while you're putting on the tefillin. And inevitably, they would always ask us, so why do we put on tefillin? The answer was always quick. I had this quick pitch. It was, number one, because it says in the Torah that we're supposed to put on tefillin. Number two, because while we do so, we're connecting our emotions and our intellect to God, depending on how much of a rush the guy was in, how deep into his lunch break he was. That's how many more details beyond that he would get. But both of those are extremely important. Does that make sense? Number one, because Hashem said to do so. If we're not doing a mitzvah because Hashem said to do so, why are we doing it? We dropped the whole ball. Meaning, it's nice that you love Hashem. It's nice you're doing it because of your love for Hashem. But Hashem says, I want you to do it because I asked you to do it. That's it. So if we don't have that basic level of reverence, then we've dropped that whole service aspect of it. And that's why the Alter Rebbe continues. It says, even when reverence is lacking, we're in section 7 now, if you're so coarse and so material and so involved and materialistic, and materialism is like everything you do, so it's so hard for you to develop even the most basic reverence for God, says the Alter Rebbe, at least in the moment that you serve Hashem, just use the basic analogy of a king. Hashem is your king, and you have to do what Hashem says because Hashem is the king, and we want to do what the king wants. And that's it. That shouldn't be so difficult. At least that we should be able to handle. The Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan Metzaki, let's read the story inside because it's such a great story. This is at the end of section 7, so we're on page 507. The Tanya now cites a proof from the Talmud that such a basic feeling that someone is watching, so I need to behave, could be considered actual reverence of God. In other words, like the basic level of like the king asked me to do this, therefore I'm doing it. Rabbi Yochanan Metzaki said to his students as a blessing on his deathbed, May it be God's will that you revere heaven as much as you revere humans. That seems like an odd blessing. Hello, the whole point is to revere God more than we revere humans, right? So the students complained. They said, is that all? That's like your parting deathbed blessing to us? So he replied, if only it would be so much. You should know that when a person commits a transgression, he says, I hope no man sees me. And to avoid that basic level of, I only do things when I'm only moral when other people are watching. I mean, unfortunately, many people are at a stage where even when people are watching, they can't seem to stay moral. But let's say you manage to reach that stage, right? What I do behind closed doors is my business. I hope nobody sees me when I do whatever. If we can at least get rid of that very basic level of, I hope no one sees me. There's never a moment when it's like, I hope no one sees. No, I'm all alone, and still I do the right thing. That is the very, very basic level of obedience to Hashem. It's not just I hope no one sees me, but I do this because Hashem is always watching.
You'd go insane if you did that.
Okay, so now the flip side, right? But reverence alone is also not enough to drive the Torah mitzvot home. Why not? Why can't we just have reverence, right? And not have love? Because then you won't have achieved the level of serving God as a son serves his father, as a son doesn't live for his father. And that is another meditation that we have to have. Right? So even in a negative commandment, where reverence is the key emotion here, at the very basic level, there should be a little bit of a meditation of, I do this mitzvah, when I do this mitzvah, I connect to Hashem, and we've spoken so much about this. This is the more popular one. Right? I love Hashem so much, and Hashem created me, and Hashem is so great, and He gives me all these amazing opportunities to connect to Him. And from that love, that connection, this mitzvah has the potential to lead me to a connection with God. That gives us the son part of the relationship, right? which is actually very, very similar to what a son says, right? A son says, I love my parents so much. Of course I would do this for my parents. There's nothing I wouldn't do for my parents. Right? And the ultimate level of this, says the Alter Rebbe, is when we recognize that our soul is just one, but our soul is one with all the other souls. Right? The Medrash tells us that all of our souls were once included in one soul, and that was the soul of Adam. Right? Why is it that when Adam was in Gan Eden, right? we all have this question at a certain point, when he was in the Garden of Eden, he couldn't hold himself back? Really? Do you know that the Medrash says that Adam was created in the last moments before Shabbos? And he was told that you're not allowed to eat from the tree of knowledge only until Shabbos comes in. So we're talking about a period, I think, according to some Medrashim, it was 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever. And he couldn't hold himself in. And one cannot help but boggle the mind, okay, me, Hashem says throughout your whole life, you should never forget to make a bracha, you should never do this, you should never, I'm going to slip up every once in a while, right? And it's only me, everybody else is doing okay, just me, I slipped up. But if you're the only guy in the world, it's only for 3 hours, and there's one thing. He didn't have any other mitzvot, by the way. He didn't have to put on tefillin every day. He didn't even have a spouse that he needed to get along with yet. Well, he did. Later on he did. Eventually he did. But you couldn't. So Chassidus explains that he was Taka the only guy, and he was the only, but he had all of the evil inclinations, right? So Jeff's evil inclination. Jeff doesn't have an evil inclination, but okay, sorry. Everybody in this room's evil inclinations, together with all the evil inclinations that exist in the world, were all bottled up into one because he had everybody's souls. So to resist that temptation. I don't know. Even if you just had mine, it probably would have been tough. Mine plus all of everybody in this room, I definitely wouldn't have been able to handle it. Everybody in the world,
he had all the Yetzer Tov too.
He did have all the Yetzer Tovs as well. But that puts him on equal footing, just like any of us. We also have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, and sometimes we slip up. So now we can understand Adam a little more.
I thought he was not supposed to eat from the tree of knowledge, bad and good and evil, because it's the tree of duality. He should be with the tree of life.
I didn't suggest any other reason.
No, say you can eat it by Shabbat.
Because once Shabbat would have come in, it would have been completely refined. The tree of knowledge would have been fine. It's not a conversation right now. I didn't mean to get into a whole conversation about the Garden of Eden. What I did want to point out is that all of our souls were at one point included in Adam's soul. In other words, all of our souls are essentially really all part of one soul. And that's because it says in the Torah, that God blew into the nostrils of man a breath of life, right? The soul, and that's the soul, the original soul came into being, and with that, humankind began, and all of those souls were expressions of that breath of life. So the ultimate level of connection to Hashem is, as he mentioned at the beginning of class, connection with all other Jews. In other words, the ultimate level of that meditation of I love God so much, I'm connecting to Hashem through this mitzvah, is I'm not just connecting myself, but I'm also connecting other Jews with me together to Hashem. When I do this mitzvah, all of the Jewish people together connect to Hashem.
He didn't have any other Jews though.
Who, Adam?
Yeah.
That's true.
That made it a lot harder. No.
Maybe too much freedom.
I don't know. I don't know if we need to get into the whole Adam saga right now. For us, right now, when we do a mitzvah, we can meditate, think that through this mitzvah that I do, it's a connection with all the Jewish people, and we're all being connected to Hashem. Which is why, when we say L'Shem Yichud before Baruch She'amar, during davening, right during davening, and there are those that actually say L'Shem Yichud, which is a special prayer, and I'll translate it in just a moment, before every single mitzvah that they do, before they light a menorah, they say L'Shem Yichud, before they read the Megillah, they say L'Shem Yichud, before they eat the matzah, they say L'Shem Yichud. L'Shem Yichud is like a 2-line prayer, and it says, for the sake of unity of God's name and God, together with all of the Jewish people. How did all the Jewish people land in here? If you're saying a little meditative prayer to think about your connection with Hashem, how did the Jewish people land in here? Well, I'm doing the mitzvah, not all the Jewish people. But because all of our souls are connected, if it's done properly, then yes, all the Jewish people are included in your mitzvah and connect to Hashem. And this is important because love can actually be selfish. Right? Think about something that a son does for his father. Even though he's doing it for his father, he's doing it because I love him so much. In the words of Chassidus, it's called Yesh Mi She'ohev. There is someone here who loves him because I love him, therefore I do it. But if I do it because all the Jewish people love Hashem, then I've managed to at least subdue that selfishness a little bit. It's not just for me, it's for all the Jewish people, because we all love Hashem, because we're all one with Hashem. That's why I do that mitzvah. And these two emotions, by the way, let's focus on the emotion of love and the desire to do a mitzvah, is actually a natural desire of every single Jew. And it reaches to such a deep level really inside of us. And we spoke about this earlier, so I'll just gloss through it quickly. It touches such a deep level inside of us that whenever we're put up against the fence, and Jews, this has happened to Jews throughout the ages. Purim is coming. That's a classic example of the Jewish people could have said, I'm not Jewish, and they would have been completely absolved from the whole Purim extermination. And yet no Jews did. Jews have always been willing to give up their lives. And that comes from that natural love, that natural connection that we have with Hashem. All we need to do is to help get in touch with that and fan it a little bit into a flame like that. It can actually drive, it can actually imbue our Torah study and our prayer and our mitzvot with passion. And remember that these meditations and all these things that we discussed, the Alter Rebbe concludes by reminding us, if you're going to learn for hours on end, or you're going to pray for hours on end, sometimes you got to pause in the middle and refresh that meditation, depending on how it's going. Just as with everything, right? We need you need more fuel for that.
More practice.
Not more practice, no, more meditation, because that can die off. That's not something that's just naturally there always. As we mentioned way earlier in today's class, nobody just gets up one day and says, oh, I love God. No, it's going to take meditation. It's going to take actually thinking about it and involving ourselves in it, etc.
That is actually, that's the first thing we do. We say it Monday, I mean.
100%. But we can do that and not think that much about God. We can just say it and move on, right? That is precisely the Alter Rebbe's point. Many people, when they put on tefillin, they barely think about God. And they're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do. And my Judaism, and I can see my grandmother's image in my head, and she's telling me if you don't put on tefillin, you should be so guilty, etc. Right? There's no God involved in that. I'm not saying they didn't put on tefillin. There is something to the power of action. There is something to the power of doing a mitzvah. But when you do a mitzvah properly, nothing can compare to that. When it's done infused with emotion, with a love, with a reverence for Hashem, then you're serving God like a son does something for his father. And equally as a servant does something for his master. With the complete obedience, it doesn't make a difference how I feel, yet I feel such a strong emotion that I want to connect to God on such a deep level. I will just say this, easier said than done. And with this we'll conclude our first lesson of Reverence and Love, Jewish Mysticism, Lessons in Tanya, chapter 41. A crash course in reverence and love.